The theme of this lecture, which I have been asked to deliver, President Muhammadu Buhari's contribution to national development, is both a reflection on leadership and an exploration of the institutions, policies, and principles that defined his presidency. While we are gathered to present Garba Shehu's According to the President, this lecture does not adopt that book's title, but rather complements it by situating the administration's advancement agenda within the broader architecture of governance and reform. Let me begin with a moment that shaped the trajectory of the 2015 Buhari presidential campaign. In the lead up to the 2015 general elections, a small but consequential meeting was held to discuss key appointments into the emerging structure of the Buhari presidential campaign. It was at that meeting that Garba Shehu's name was tabled as a prospective director of media and publicity. And I'm glad that Mala Nasiru El-Rufai is here in this meeting. He was part of that decision making. And I humbly made that suggestion. And that suggestion gave birth to the appointment of Mala Garba Shehu as the Director of Media and Publicity. The decision was based on merit. He brought a long-established reputation in political communication, editorial leadership, and public engagement. More importantly, he was considered as someone who could speak with clarity while remaining anchored in institutional discipline. From that moment, Mr. Shehu became an integral part of the political infrastructure that eventually shaped the Buhari administration. His transition from campaign spokesperson to presidential media advisor was a logical progression, a signal continuity of message and fidelity to the original orientation of the presidency. And arguably, President Buhari's public life was marked not just by official positions, but by a strong connection with many Nigerians. His reputation for integrity, as attested to by General Gawan, who was his boss, discipline, and national commitment earned him lasting support, especially in the northern parts of the country and later the south, and gave him that nickname of Say My Gaskiya. This support was built on earned social trust rather than political expediency, and it gave his administration the room to pursue difficult reforms in areas like security and the economy with a degree of public backing that was unusual in Nigerian political history. This lecture has been structured into three major parts: the introduction, with which I'm dealing with now, a reflection of evolutionary and exemplary leadership, and President Buhari's legacy 2015 to 2023, and the concluding part of the lecture. Let me start with the first segment. This lecture on President Buhari's contribution to national development reflects a lifetime of committed public service. His career has been shaped by national duty, from his early military service to his tenure as military governor of the northeastern state and thereafter Borno State. A lot of the Gen Zs don't even know that Buhari served as governor of Borno State, but he served for a very short while, where he carried out foundational reforms during the post-Civil War recovery, and later as Federal Commissioner for Petroleum and Natural Resources. Between 1976 and 1978, under his supervision, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, initiated key pipeline and depot infrastructure, and approved contracts for the Kaduna and Warri refineries, laying the foundation for Nigeria's downstream oil sector. As executive chairman of the Petroleum Special Trust Fund, he oversaw one of Nigeria's most impactful delivery-focused programs, directing resources towards roads, education, primary health care, and essential medicine during a time of physical constraint. These roles reinforced his belief in infrastructure-led growth and disciplined public service. His service as Nigeria's head of state and decades after as democratically elected president provided continuity to his earlier reformist instincts. In his dual role as president and minister of petroleum resources, he supervised major energy sector reforms, culminating in the passage of the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021. He also advanced gas infrastructure through flagship projects such as the Ajakuta-Kaduna-Kano pipeline and the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline under his decade of gas strategy. Beyond formal office, he chaired the board of trustees of the Katsina State Development Foundation, Gidauniyan Jihar Katsina, for nearly 2 decades, focusing on grassroots advancement and empowerment. These sectoral contributions in energy, infrastructure, health, and education reflect a consistent commitment to Nigerians' advancement priorities, provide context for understanding the values and the logic that later shaped his presidency. Before turning to that presidency, it is important to recognize the former president's role in reshaping Nigeria's political trajectory. In early 2013, as the leader of the Congress for Progressive Change, CPC, President Buhari formally requested and supported the creation of the CPC Merger Committee, part of a broader coalition building process that brought together the ACN, the party under which I served as the Deputy National Chairman as of that time. We also had our own transition or merger committee, the AMPP, and a faction of the ABGA, and the elements of the ruling party through the breakaway new PDP group. His endorsement and participation, along with other party leaders, such as the President Bola Tinubu and Senator Ali Modu Sharif, who was the chairman of the board of trustees of the AMPP, lent credence and credibility and direction to the merger, helping to unify disparate parties' factions under the banner of the All Progressive Congress. That coalition building paved the way for the first democratic defeat of an incumbent ruling party in Nigeria's history. President Buhari's integrity, national stature, and disciplined messaging were central to that breakthrough. Not only that, for us in the ACN, I do not intend to stir any controversy, but I will make bold to state this, that the merger in 2013 was midwife to present a Buhari or create a Buhari presidency. Because we looked at the statistics of the votes that were coming to the table. In the 2003 election against Obasanjo, Buhari raked in 2.7 million votes. In the 2007 election with Shehu Yar'Adua, 2012, 12.7 million votes. In 2007, after the PDP unleashed its machinery, it came to 6.6 million votes against Yar'Adua. In 2011, it went back to 12.2 million votes. And when we were conceptualizing the merger, we said, what would give us a head start? And obviously, it was in the back of our consciousness that a merger with the CPC, though the CPC at that time had only one state, the ACN had 6 states, the AMPP had 3 states. But when you sum out the total votes that gave us the presidency in 2015, the aggregate of the total votes were 15.4 million votes. So basically, what we brought to the table, the other parties that were in the merger, in addition to Buhari's 12.2 million votes, were 3.2 million votes. I do not intend to stir any controversy, but I am saying that that was the most realistic and pragmatic thing that we needed to do. I was the deputy national chairman of the ACN then, so I anchored the transition. My colleagues in the ACN are here. FIME is here. What we did and the decisions that we took was to provide or to produce a Buhari presidency. Buhari formally requested, I've done that. His endorsement assisted in that. No account of Buhari's President Buhari's tenure would be complete without acknowledging the extended periods he spent on medical leave. These moments were politically delicate, were also telling of his leadership philosophy and personality. Rather than disrupt governance like we saw in the previous administration, he allowed the constitutional order to function as intended, delegating authority to the vice president and demonstrating a rare commitment to institutional stability. While some perceived as a slowing of momentum, these periods revealed his preference for rule-based delegation and his continued confidence in the systems his administration had built. It was leadership by structure. As Secretary to the Government of the Federation, I had the responsibility of coordinating the machinery of government under his leadership. The role offered direct exposure to the administration's internal logic, interministerial coordination, and institutional reforms. Today's lecture, therefore, is not a catalogue of achievements. It is a reflection on how the Buhari administration approached governance, its reform logic, institutional priorities, and long-term intent. No single lecture can exhaustively unpack the complexity of those years. Rather, this presentation offers a considered overview of key interventions and the thinking behind them. The period in view was one of recalibration, characterized by policy consistency and a deliberate effort to rebuild state capacity, outcomes that merit rigorous policy and historic scrutiny. The aim here is to situate the administration within the larger arc of Nigeria's developmental journey, focusing on what was done, how it was done, and why it matters. President Buhari's legacies, May 2015 to May 2023. When President Buhari assumed office in May 2015, Nigeria was facing acute macroeconomic and security challenges. Crude oil prices had collapsed, revenues had declined sharply, and public institutions struggled with credibility. Boko Haram insurgency had escalated in the northeast, testing federal unity. The administration responded by prioritizing fiscal discipline, capital spending, and institutional reforms to restore stability and rebuild trust. The Strategic Implementation Plan, SIP, served as a short-term stabilization tool, followed by the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, 2017 to 2020, which laid out a strategy for infrastructure, industrialization, and public sector reform. The ERGP boosted investor confidence with clear policy targets. In 2021, the administration launched the National Poverty Reduction with Growth Strategy, aiming to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty within 10 years. Chaired by the Vice President and supported by governors and ministers and the private sector, the MPRGS adopted a multi-pronged strategy, including microeconomic stability, industrialization, redistributive programs, and public service reform. Ladies and gentlemen, the administration's second term in 2019 marked a shift to evidence-led governance. It established the Policy Programs and Projects Audit Committee to review first-term outcomes and set new priorities, culminating in the 9 priority areas launched in August 2019. This covered microeconomy, stability, food security, energy, infrastructure, industrialization, human capital, social inclusion, governance, and security. These priorities informed the medium-term National Development Plan 2021 to 2025 and Nigeria Agenda 2050, which introduced long-range planning anchored in demographics, sectoral linkages, and performance benchmarks. Both frameworks emerged from wide consultation across government and partners. There are numerous projects that were undertaken by the Buhari administration. I won't want to bore you with them, but suffices to mention strategic prioritization of transformative legacy projects, such as the Second Niger Bridge, the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, the Abuja-Kaduna-Kano Highway, and the Warri-Itakpe rail line, each improving mobility, logistics, and regional connectivity. Several of these projects are still ongoing. Hundreds of kilometers were covered by road infrastructure, and I believe that the current government is doing its best to ensure that these roads become functional and usable for the communities. Ladies and gentlemen, one other area in which Buhari's leadership came to the forefront was in the management of the COVID-19 pandemic, which posed one of Nigeria's most complex governance challenges. Under President Buhari, the response was guided by science, fiscal intervention, and coordination. And that earned him the nomenclature of the ECOWAS champion on COVID-19. He worked with regional leaders on border protocols, preparedness, and equitable vaccine access. His steady diplomacy positioned Nigeria as a regional anchor during a time of great uncertainty. The Presidential Task Force, which I chaired, provided high-level oversight, eliminating bureaucratic delays, ensuring federal and subnational alignment, testing infrastructure expanded swiftly with over 200 labs activated. The NCDC led on surveillance and diagnostics, supported by real-time data and public health communication that maintained citizen trust. I can say with every degree of certainty that in the course of the over 1 year that I chaired the national response on COVID-19, we had unfettered access to President Buhari. We had political support that we needed. I remember one of the days when I went up, briefed him, and I told him that I was shutting down the country. He gazed at me strangely, as if, where did you get that power from? I said, it's delegated authority, sir. When you appointed me as chairman of the COVID-19 response team, which had a multi-level approach, you gave us the power. We've discussed everything. The Minister of Aviation has spoken to the aviation authorities for the necessary NOTAPS rules to go out. The Minister of Health has done his bit, and for that reason, we have taken a decision to shut down the country. He said, have you thought about security? I said, yes, I've met with the security officials, I've met with the Chief of Army Staff, with the retinue of different officers, and we factored that. Because the shutting down was not only across our borders, we were also shutting down within the country. And he was concerned about the daily earnings of our people. So he wanted clarity of what we intended to do. And we gave him that clarity. And for that reason, he decided that we should go ahead. And we did it. And to the glory of God, we have done so well with our response, to the extent that several countries have copied it, and they still copy it. And we have received accolades from international organizations like the World Health Organization, the United Nations, as Nigeria's response being one of the best globally. So I think it is part of the leadership that he provided that gave us that. Social interventions included cash transfers. Over 1 million vulnerable households. We trained digital workers, targeted SMEs with relief, COVID mobilized. It was multi-sectoral and multi-level in terms of the work that we did. Under President Buhari, institutionally, the administration pursued reforms through executive orders and legislative action. Executive orders 13 and 14 introduced performance contracting and institutionalized the presidential transition process. The latter stands out as a pioneering move. It repositioned transitions from ceremonial handovers to structured rule-based processes that reinforce national stability and continuity in governance. In doing so, it created a new standard of transition that has outlived his office, but still remains as an instrument of shared goals and institutional trust. Major legislative milestones include the Petroleum Industrial Act and 4 finance acts aligning fiscal policy with economic strategy. The Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council oversaw over 100 reforms that improved Nigeria's ease of doing business rankings. In the digital economy, broadband coverage expanded to nearly all the local governments under President Buhari, while the National Digital Policy and Strategy provided a coherent framework. The NIM-SIM integration strengthened identity systems and local content policies. Under President Buhari, Nigeria experienced an unprecedented surge in military modernization, with asset acquisition reaching its peak across armed forces. In April of 2018, he approved $1 billion intervention for military equipment. And by 2022, the defense budget had grown to 1.2 trillion, with significant capital directed toward modern platforms and logistics. This represented the most intense military buildup since the return to democracy, reflecting an urgent response to security challenges and a disciplined strategy for operational renewal. Education did not suffer. Let me come to an area where I believe history will judge President Buhari well. Nigeria's foreign policy under President Buhari combined pragmatic diplomacy with a clear ambition to reassert the country's leadership across Africa and on the global stage. His tenure saw strategic appointments that elevated Nigeria's visibility in multilateral institutions. Most notably, Nigeria successfully led a re-election campaign for Dr. Akinwumi Adesina as president of the African Development Bank, despite international headwinds and a contested review process. Under his leadership, Akinwumi's leadership for 10 years, the bank's authorized capital expanded from 93 billion to 318 billion, directly impacting 565 million lives through transformative investments in infrastructure, energy, and food systems. In 2015, Professor Bernard Orama assumed office as president of the Afro-Exim Bank under President Buhari's leadership, growing the bank's portfolio from under 5 billion to over 37 billion by 2024, and strengthening Africa's trade finance architecture. Amina J. Mohammed, who served as Minister of Environment under President Buhari, was appointed United Nations Deputy Secretary General in 2017 and reappointed in 2022, advancing Nigeria's global standing in development and climate diplomacy. The assertive posture continued with the election of Ambassador Tijani Muhammad Bade as president of the 74th United Nations General Assembly in 2019, the first Nigerian to hold that role since Joseph Garba in a period of over 30 years. We never went back there until Nigeria gave the maximum support that Bade required to be able to assume that office. In 2021, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala became the first African and the first woman to lead the World Trade Organization. Her tenure had been defined by institutional reform and renewed confidence, and underscored by her early reappointment in November 2024. The world was not to wait. They were eager to get her reappointed. They appointed her way ahead of time. Her tenure is supposed to elapse I think in September of this year. Beyond these high-level appointments, Nigeria deepened multilateral agreements with ECOWAS, the AU, and the UN, while forging bilateral partnerships to strengthen infrastructure financing, technology transfer, and regional trade. Under Buhari's leadership, Nigeria's diplomacy became more deliberate, reinforcing the country's role as a continental power and a credible actor in global affairs. In the same vein, he went ahead before leaving office to sign and ratify the African Continental Free Trade Zone Agreement. The Buhari administration imprint lies not only in reforms it pursued, but in systems it established to deliver and sustain impact. Sectoral efforts in nutrition and several other fields of endeavor were undertaken. In the area of tax reform, Buhari instituted a tax reform before he left office. As a matter of fact, the expansion that is being done under the Tinubu administration is quite commendable, and he has now consolidated by the new laws that have been signed to strengthen coordination across federal and state levels, aimed at improving efficiency, reducing evasion, and advancing fiscal sustainability. In local governance, the Buhari administration initiated efforts towards fiscal autonomy through Executive Order Number 10 in 2020, aimed at enabling direct allocations to local governments in line with constitutional provisions. Though the order was later struck down by the courts, it set a precedent that gained legal force in 2014, when the same courts, through the Supreme Court, upheld the right of the local governments to receive allocations directly from the Federation account as challenged by the current administration. Under the Tinubu administration, institutional reforms have also continued. The Central Delivery Coordinating Unit evolved into the Central Result Delivery and Coordination Unit, retaining its mandate to track and support executive priorities. Another notable legacy of the Buhari administration's reform is the Federal Civil Service reform that were instituted. It is indeed heartwarming to note that Nigeria has recently gazetted the operation procedure for trade under the AFTA. The concrete steps towards implementation reinforces the foundational work led during this regime. I have prepared a document that I will pass across to Mala Garba, which he will circulate, that contains all these details. I've not been able to go through them for want of time, and I do not want to bore you because the business of the day is to really launch these books and make sure that every Nigerian lays his hand on it. But let me conclude. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, President Muhammadu Buhari was not drawn to the theater of power, but to its quiet burden of responsibility. He governed with duty over drama, conviction over applause. He will be remembered not only for performance, but for principles, for anchoring governance in systems that endure. He led with a sense of time greater than his tenure, knowing that national progress is not a sprint, nor a solitary marathon, but a relay across generations. Each administration inherits unfinished work and must carry it forward with clarity and conviction. In this sense, Buhari's leadership was not about finality, but about setting things in motion, reforms that could outlast him, institutions that could withstand political tides, and a temperament that reminded the state of its quiet obligation to its citizens. The book, according to President, offers us not a portrait of power, but a vantage point into how a man entrusted with the weight of a nation bore it with measured intent. It is a record of words, yes, but beneath those words lie choices, silences, struggles, and an enduring faith in Nigeria's promise. And so, as we reflect today, let it not only be merely to remember, but to recommit, to see governance not as the triumph of the will, but as the careful tending of a shared future. Buhari did his bit. The baton has been passed to President Bola Tinubu, GCFF. And history, as always, waits not for perfection, but for perseverance. I thank you all for listening, and God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you.